am really thrilled to welcome here at WUDMilan Matt May, all the way from Seattle. Welcome, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us and being with us today. So Matt May is Adobe's head of inclusive design. His work includes integrating more equitable design practices across every aspect of the Adobe user experience, training and mentoring the Adobe design team. And his speech today will explore the work we have before us to create a more equitable and responsible organization, which create more equitable and responsible products. So the stage is all yours, Matt.
Great, and thank you. I'm honored to be giving this talk, and I recognize that I'm just waking up in this dark, wet little city that I live in, and you all have been at this for what, 9 hours now. So I want to keep this brief, but I'm really excited about the just where we are and what we've learned about the inclusion, and I really liked the themes of sort of ethics and responsibility. I think a lot of when we're talking about inclusive design in particular, there's this sense of it being a nice thing to think about, and maybe we can just try a little bit of this or that, but there's a lot more to it in how it changes us and the ways that we do our work, and so a lot of people kind of reach this threshold in their thinking where they go, okay, I get it. You don't need to sell this to me anymore. What do I do next? Because what we need to do is to change the way that we think about designing things. And a lot of these things need to start over. We have to understand where we are, and we have to understand the things that go into a truly inclusive process that leads to better products. So to talk a little bit about just my history and where I come into this, I started working in disability communities, and I was an engineer, and sort of my first exposure to accessibility was working for an online grocery site. And this site had users that would call in and ask for basically screen reader support, and not just because it was a technical consideration, but because it was a difference between making your grocery shopping experience take 15 minutes once a week versus phone calls and shuttle buses and ultimately 3 hours to have the same effect, right? So this was a matter of changing people's lives by making minor changes in what we did. And the way that we did that was by actually listening to our users. I worked in web standards, so I worked for the World Wide Web Consortium on the accessibility guidelines, including the authoring tool accessibility guidelines. And then I joined Adobe in 2007 as an accessibility engineer, and in 2008, I published a book called Universal Design for Web Applications. And I kind of joke about this, that like anything that's technical that's in this book, anything that's about the HTML or ARIA specifications is completely out of date, much less all of the mobile stuff that's in there. But the process stuff actually kind of holds up, and that's one of the lessons that we have in inclusive design, that this is not like when you see people talk about the work that they're doing and the results that they've had by using inclusive design techniques. What you usually hear is, this is inclusive design. Well, it's not. Design is a verb, right? Design is a thing that you do. The product is an artifact of this work, and your inclusivity is baked into that product. And so you can't take a bad process and come out with a good product. That doesn't make sense. The process itself is something that we need to think about. And so when we think about something like inclusive design, we have to understand that this inclusive design is a method. You know, like that this is a technique, a technology. It is a practice that people need to learn and to understand in the context of the work that they do. And in, within Adobe, what we are doing with inclusive design is making it, everyone's job. Not everyone is a designer, but everybody has a role with respect to the inclusivity of their organization and their products. And until we can make that connection in people's heads of not just, this is a nice thing to do, but this is what you do now. That is when people start to understand the importance of thinking about the products that they're producing in a new way. And inclusive design, when we say inclusive design, I think that everybody immediately goes into their head, okay, so design is a word, and then inclusive is an adjective that goes before that word. And so then I think about something that I think of as being inclusive, and then I emulate that, and that's inclusive design. And that's one interpretation of inclusive design. But it's one that falls apart really easily, because if you've done just kind of one little project that's inclusive, but you haven't investigated all of the other things that you do that are exclusive, where have you gotten? What have you gained by doing it that way? The practice of inclusive design involves the structures that underlie this, and the processes that lead to the products that you produce, and it involves sort of well-known research techniques and things like participatory action research and co-design that require you to listen more deeply to users, and not just any users, but the people who traditionally have been the most marginalized within the process. So instead of having an organization where you'd say, why would someone do such and such? For example, we make a product called Lightroom. Lightroom has, lots of people's entire, photo archives saved onto either our cloud or their hard drives or wherever they want to put it. And I know this personally from my history, because I have 120 gigabytes of images. That's my life, right? And the reality is that when we start to think about people as caricatures, when we start to think of basic pieces of people's lives, and we start to think about something like blindness, it's very easy to think of the inclusivity of a tool like Lightroom to people who are blind or have low vision as being a why would they? Why would they care about having access to the images? They can't see them. Well, no, but maybe they can see some of it. Maybe they need to be able to detect who's in what photo. Vision itself is a pretty complex system, and the idea of having low vision is just, in I think in Europe it's 6/6 vision, and in the United States it's 20/20 vision, right? So being able to see the seventh line on the eye chart with your glasses on, right? If you're not able to be corrected to be able to see at that acuity, then you technically have low vision. And so sometimes that just means that you squint or you lean closer. Sometimes that means that having larger fonts or higher contrast is more important. And so when we immediately just caricature these categories of users and assume that they don't want to be participating in the system, then we build systems that they can't participate in. And that's the problem. So by reaching in and asking people how they would use the systems that we develop, we get a much better idea of how we do this. But there's another thing about methods that's important to understand, which is that they need to have a goal. You don't just create a method without any intention. Even if you're being artistic and you develop a new method for applying paint to a canvas, you still have a goal in mind. You still have something that you want to do that's creative at the end of that task. And so for there to be inclusive design, there has to be a goal for inclusive design. And at least from my perspective, that goal is equity. And equity is a word that we need to be talking about more because it sounds like equality. I think that's also true in Italian, but the perceptions of it are in the reality are different, just like that idea of inclusive design. To me, equity is the adequate return of the investment of your time and energy and participation in a system. If you feel like you are having to put out so much of your energy to just have a foothold within the space that you're in, and you're putting out and putting out and putting out and getting little tiny bits back, that's not an equitable system. You know, the idea is that everybody has some kind of say and has some kind of citizenship in the systems that we create. And that's not equality. That's not everybody gets 1/100th of the system, because that can also be gained too. You know, people that have a little bit of investment in this that get a big reward for participating, versus people that live in that system and need to have the most attention paid to their wants and needs. But an equitable system is one where everybody feels like they get more out of it than what they put into it, and that when their needs are highest, that they're the ones that are listened to the most, and that the rewards are distributed evenly according to how people are participating in that system. And that means that we have to change a lot about how we work with users, how we think about our participation with them. Co-design has a range of different levels of participation, and different levels of ownership of this process. If I were to go into a community that I'm not a member of, and go in and do some research and do some interviews about people and what their wants and needs are, and then say thank you, and then go back to my company with my employees, and none of whom are a part of this community, and then produce a product that I then sell to this community, is that an equitable system, right? Of course it's not. You know, you're not actually responding to the needs of the people that are participating. You're exploiting the needs and wants for your own benefit. And so the benefit system needs to change as well. How we compensate people, how we understand the ownership or co-ownership of the work that we do, when all of us are really putting all of our energy into the creation of that. That's something that needs to change about how we think about the designs and the work that we do. Another argument about inclusive design that we hear fairly commonly is, well, inclusive design helps everyone. Yeah, a lot of the time it does. You know, we hear stories about curb cuts, little cuts into the concrete on the street corners, so that people using wheelchairs can roll through. But that it also benefits people who have strollers or carrying things on carts or things like that. And so that's held up as something that was done for this purpose, but benefits a lot of other people. And that's true in a lot of cases, that we have secondary communities that benefit from the things that we do from an inclusive design lens. But that's not the point. The point of inclusive design is to create this equity and sometimes that might not benefit you, and that's okay, because it doesn't have to. It's not important that you get something out of this by bringing somebody else into that equation. And sometimes those connections aren't very clear. Sometimes it's not that you, on the same day that whatever you're creating is released, achieve a benefit while a disabled user, for example, also achieves a benefit. It might be years later where you actually start to understand the benefit of that. Maybe you yourself become disabled and now you're able to participate in the system because you designed it that way. But I hear a lot of stories where people talk about making this case for inclusivity and why this is ethically important, and having to connect that to there being a material benefit for everybody else. But the problem is everybody else, like everybody else, our user, when we talk about that in design terms, our user is really well accommodated. You know, they have 92% of what they want, and we're working on making it 94% of what they want, while you have people that have 0% of what they want, and bringing them up to 50% would be a benefit, right? This is the point of inclusive design. The people that are the most marginalized are unable to participate in a lot of cases and need to be brought up to be able to participate equally. You're not able to do that by still focusing on how beneficial it is to the majority of users who are already really well, having their needs well met. Another, another piece of that puzzle is the idea of the return on investment for this, and I call this the money trap. The idea of having to sell people on the idea by saying it'll make them more money, it will make the product more sellable, more profitable, and I admonish you, beg you, don't fall into this trap. And it is a trap, because what it's telling you is that it's only important if you're an advocate for this kind of inclusion, if you can prove that it's going to make people more money. And the way that I describe this is, if I hold out a new set of users that represents inclusion, and I hold out a pile of money that you get for bringing these people into the system, and you're a business person, which hand are you looking at, right? You're looking at the money, right? And so all of the decisions that are made that relate to this inclusion are now tied to having to prove that you've made money for this work. I remember kind of in the early days of usability, the usability experts would talk about this all the time, that we can prove that a more usable product is a more profitable product over time. But if you are looking at your profit and loss statement month by month or quarter by quarter and looking to see where we produced this benefit, it's very easy for it to just get cut. And so it might be enough to motivate people just to start down this path of inclusion, but you also have to understand to express the relevancy, like why you need to keep doing this, why this isn't just like a PR exercise, and why it is something that causes you to change things. And accessibility is a great example of this. Like, this is the Google result for business case for accessibility has 1.15 billion results. I know that's off. It's it's complicated, but this idea of we have to prove that it's profitable to bring disabled people into like a simple level of being able to participate in the products that we produce. That leads people in very scary, bad directions, because the least ethical actors in a system like that are looking to capitalize on people's fears and people's greed, right? Their profit motive to be doing this work. And then you see companies that make things like accessibility overlays that where they're selling to website providers and companies that don't really understand much of what they're doing. Well, hey, go and use this, and you won't have to do any of the work yourself, which we know is true. It's a lie. It's but it's a convenient lie. And if you have somebody that wants to make money off of that, and you have somebody that wants to save money off of that, they're going to come together and they're going to work to continue to exclude people, right? That's the wrong way to think about the work that we're doing. There's one other trap that I want to talk about, which is called I call it the inclusion paradox. Whenever I would talk to people especially in engineering, about doing inclusion work, I would get these kinds of questions like, well, how many people are we talking about that would benefit from this? Versus how much is this going to cost? How long is this going to take? When do we know when we're done? And after years and years of sort of banging my head against this problem, I came to this kind of epiphany, which is that there's no answer that's correct for that, right? This is the inclusion paradox. any answer that you give is either too few people to matter or too many to be believed. This is not, and like when you get into this place, having this conversation with people, there's this idea that you're having a conversation. Right? You're in a situation where you can convince somebody that this is what they want to do. This is being framed to you as, I don't actually want to do this, and I want to push back on this, but I don't want to sound like the bad guy. And so what I've realized in having a lot of these conversations, especially when we're talking about an engineering team in a larger company, and I'm not just talking about Adobe, this has been, every time I talk about this to some other company, they go, oh, yes, this is what's happening. Just like making the business case for a company's products is not my job. I'm not a business person. I don't have an MBA. It is not my job to prove that the numbers go in the right direction over time. It's also not the engineering team's job to ask how many users are going to be affected by this. This is the product team's job. And so understanding the pushback, who's objecting to things on what grounds, is really important for doing the advocacy work that you need to do. Since this is an international conference, I wanted to mention one really important thing, which is that inclusion doesn't localize well. And I'll give an example of this. We have a representation and equality group in one subset of our company, and we published a questionnaire to several different groups that we work with, all representing minoritized communities in North America. And we asked a question about race with sort of what is your race, and the answers were white, Latinx, Black, Asian, Indigenous, Native American, and other, right? And there are many subcategories or different groups that have been that are then left out of that equation as well. But that would be like, and then we released the same thing in Brazil and in India. And in India, how do you answer that question, right? The context of race in India, in China, in Brazil, even in Western Europe versus North America is fundamentally different. And so once we try to put people into boxes and sort of quantitatively understand them, we see that those labels fall apart, right? What are Indian people going to answer in a list that only really has Asian as a descent? So we have to think that, like, we have to think about this as a global concern, and that inclusivity is different from one community to another. So all of this comes into play and is relevant and is something that we have to struggle with. The people that are excluded in one part of the world naturally are less excluded in other parts of the world in most cases. And so there's this, in research, you'd call it positionality. Where am I and what is the situation that I'm in? Because your form of inclusion or equity differs wherever you are and in whatever situation that you're in. And so it's hard to say, like, well, we're going to do a racial inclusion project over here, but we're going to do a gender inclusion project over here, but we're going to do a disability project over here, but we're going to do an aging project over here, where we're taking one little piece of each individual and then matching it up to one product, and then that's our inclusion project. What we need to do is have a better understanding of all of our users, and not just the users that we have, but the users that we want to have. We want to envision the ecosystem of users that we want to be participating equitably together in. And that requires a lot deeper thinking about the ideas. Like, labels are important, they're necessary because they cut down the amount of time once we get to the implementation phase, that we're not constantly saying, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? But they bring stereotypes along with them. And as long as we realize that each person individually has their own traits, Kimberly Crenshaw defined intersectionality as not just the identities that overlap, but that the exclusion that comes along with those identities. And of course, the exclusion is the thing that we're trying to fix. So we need to understand that there isn't just, well, we fixed this screen reader problem for this person. If their economic status makes it impossible for them to have the kinds of hardware and software that they need to actually participate with what we're giving them. So I want to wrap up by talking about what we're doing and how I call myself a designer, because you don't actually ever see a lot of things that I've created. Like I don't put a great deal of energy into the graphic design, which people sort of think is like, that's design. I'm really more of a systems designer now, and I think that it's important when we are thinking about things that involve inclusion, that we're not just changing the products, but we're changing the structures and the processes of how those products are created and maintained, and who participates, and who and who is working on these projects, and where they're located, and how they collaborate with one another, and how their feedback and their contributions are recognized. All of these things require changes to the ways that we do business, and not just within the design organization. So I came to Adobe Design from the accessibility organization 4 years ago. And in those 4 years, I'll show you some of the things that we've done to wrap up. But we made a lot of progress by focusing first on the designers. And because at Adobe, we're a design company. This is our whole thing. This is what we sell. And we have connections to every product team. Our designers are assigned to different teams to develop their products. So we know a lot about how things work from team to team. And what is happening now is that the design organization is evolving into one that is the educator, the broker, like the person, the contacts, the people that are trying to get everybody to understand what their responsibilities are as product managers, as program managers, as as salespeople, as engineers, as testers in the products, and how our research is conducted, and how we source that research. All of these things matter, and it doesn't mean that everybody has to become an expert on inclusivity for us to do this, but everybody needs to know a little. Like I say this specific thing a lot, and people kind of get it. Like, we need a few people who know a lot, but we need a lot who know a little, right? That's the key takeaway, I think, from all of this. We need people to we need to get to a point that everybody understands what our inclusion goals are as an organization, and what we're being measured on as a product team, and also what our responsibilities are to one another, and how we measure the progress that we're making. Once we do that, we're not sort of educating people on the fly. We're just, as we go, having to explain the basic aspects of inclusion. And that lets us get into much deeper, conversations, and people understand what their responsibility is. They know that they're not going to be, limiting their career by saying out loud, we need more money to research this specific problem, or to bring these specific groups in to get their collaboration. That's the most important part of this. And so what we did at Adobe was we started by creating the Adobe Inclusive Design Workshop. Actually, Regine Gilbert and I co-presented this once at the Design Plus Diversity conference. So this is the full course. And if you Google Adobe Inclusive Design Workshop, you'll find the repository that has these documents. But this is about 70 pages of content talking not just about disability, but about economic status, about gender and relationships, about race and skin tone. And so everybody in Adobe Design has taken this course in person when we were allowed to do that. I actually finished my 11th workshop in my 9th city around the world in January of 2020. So that's the best timed thing that I've ever done. But that's the starting point. Everybody at that point had the same language to use when they were talking about inclusivity and why we care about it. And that enabled Adobe Design to say, this is what's important to us. These are the things that we are going to expect our product teams to work on. And that has spread through the rest of the organization. So this is now has now spread into things like our spectrum design language. The first principle of our design language is inclusive design. It was the first thing that we defined as being being important for this, and that's evolved into this principle statement that we have on the Spectrum website that you can take a look at. But everything that goes into this, everything that's submitted from a product team to become a part of the core Spectrum language, has a set of requirements of inclusivity to go through, not just for the technical accessibility of it, but the language that we use, and if there is a human representation to anything that we do, things like iconography, that we're also thinking about the inclusivity of things like that. And the last piece of this really is the idea of our events. That we have talked about this for several years now, but the inclusivity of event spaces is really important. Adobe Max is about 12,000 people the last time we held it in 2019. And it's an enormous space. It's in the LA Convention Center. And you can think about 12,000 people in a room together and what is required in terms of people feeling like this is a space that they can participate in. Things like prayer spaces, nursing rooms, quiet areas so that people can decompress. Things like making spaces for wheelchair users to move in and out freely of a very crowded space, or to navigate the outdoor bash where we have food and drink and things that are moving around. Visibility to sign language interpreters, captioning at all of the events. All of these things are things that we think about in advance to do this work. And the way that we do that is that we listen to the customers and what they're looking for, and we provide what we can when we do this. More so, if you look at what we've had to do with virtual events, the same thing. We offered captions in 5 different languages, and we're looking at sign language for in our events in 2022 across all of the sessions that we're giving. So when everybody understands what their responsibility is, they're not afraid to ask the questions about what they can do to make that work better. And at that, I think that is where we start to see the value of this, and everybody starts to understand the responsibility and the ethics that are involved in creating this experience that's more beneficial to everyone that participates. So with that, I want to say thank you. I'm going to take this little bug over my shoulder off. And,
thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think we have some question for you, if you don't mind. Let me go through the chat. So one question is, how can we make our clients understand the importance of inclusive design?
Clients, yeah, those are tricky. I can actually answer this in person, like from my personal experience. Between the working for the W3C and for Adobe, I started a design consultancy, and what we had said was that something that we do. It's not, we don't ask the client, are you going to, do you need to do this accessibly? I think that's the important, it's important for you to have a baseline. Like this is what we do, because the clients don't necessarily understand why. They just know that there's a list of things that they don't particularly understand well, that they're responsible, that they're paying money for, and would you please just take care of this stuff over here? So one of the things that I can advise is say what it is that you do, and if accessibility and inclusivity is something that's a part of your process, that's a part of your requirements, then say that's what you do. If you're a consulting organization that does that. I would love to say that if you're a contractor working for a company that you just say, well, I'm going to make it accessible and they'll love it. If you're not the one that's implementing the designs that you're creating, you have very little control over that. And it's safe to say there are a lot of companies that don't care. And my advice there is, to use a Buddhist phrase, don't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. It's not your job to convince somebody to care about this when they're not ready to care, and that's hard, but also you are putting out more effort doing this work than somebody who's just like, we have a bunch of clients and we want you to be one of our clients, and this is all about the money. Those two communities will find each other. What's important is that you find the parts of the community that actually are willing to do that work, and that you can do that sort of out loud, right? Like with intention, instead of sort of trying to slip it into somebody's already existing work.
Thank you. Another question is, did it ever happen to you that in the process of inclusion, you designed something that excluded someone else? And how did you manage that situation?
I mean, I think all of the inclusion work that we have has an aspect of that. All change is not 100% beneficial instantly to everyone. And as evidence of that, I offer basically any redesign of any major product ever, right? If you logged into Facebook tomorrow and Facebook had changed its interface for the 6th time in so many years, your first reaction is like, I have invested this time to do this, to do this the way that I want to do it, and now I don't have that. This is, so I guess what I'm talking about is really a lower level part of this, of that question, which is there a better, right? Like, is there a materially everybody benefits better to this in the, like, at the most basic? And ultimately people complain when there are things that are new, and that's normal and to be expected. The case of sort of user versus user conflict is, I think, kind of overstated. That there's not a lot of the time that doing something for a hard of hearing user is going to negatively impact a hearing user over here. But this is like it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? It's not like a one-shot thing as you're doing this. What you're really doing is kind of, you're learning to drive as you're in the car, and like you start and you're crashing on all sides, right? Like you're just running into all of the edges of this. You get better by acquiring more knowledge about how to drive, and it's uneven, and sometimes you invest too much in one community at the expense of not doing anything for other communities. And I think vision, like the blind community, I think there's a logical connection to say like, well, we need to do this because screen readers, and then accessibility gets boiled down into like, do screen reader stuff, and that's it. But there's so much more, like there's contrast, there's captioning, there's keyboard support, there's simple language, that all of the other aspects of ways that people are excluded technically in accessibility terms that are just fuzzier or harder for people to contextualize to the work that they're doing. And so the message there ends up being like, accessibility equals blind users and blind users equals screen readers. And that's it. Like, you do that and you're done. And so that, I think, is really the lesson there. There are always more communities to reach out to and to establish relationships to. And what I'm saying sounds like you have to go talk to a lot of people. And guess what? You do. You're a designer. Your job is to take an object and a person and make them fit together, right? You can't do that without actually thinking about the person. And the way that you do that is through that kind of dialogue. Like, so yes, that happens all the time. People get frustrated by this. Twitter, the Twitter release that had high contrast. So they met the technical standard for that, but then as people were scrolling, they were having experiences of headaches, and users produced feedback to this after the fact, and they were angry that this was just something that was done that they didn't get to participate in. And so you had someone like Alex Hogard who you complained about their own experience with this particular problem. And so understanding that that there are always opportunities to learn from the people that feel like they're left out of that situation, to get better. It's not possible to go in all different directions at once, but having a posture of being able to accept that people are angry about the decisions that you've made, that's the first step to actually moving through that phase, that process.
Thank you so much. Next question for you is, you said equal is a goal, but how close we are to that goal?
Oh, this is the thing. It's almost like, and this is like sort of from my perspective, white guy in North America, it feels to me like the forces of inclusivity and the forces of exclusivity are at war right now. And so the idea of there being like this perfect thing at the end, I'm sorry, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that humans and humankind evolves in all different directions, and they all have their concerns, and those concerns manifest themselves as needs and wants, and become political debates, and that is something that's always going to be there. So is everybody going to be happy? Is everybody going to be equal? I would love for that to happen. I would love to have the calculus that makes that happen. But it also seems to me like there's a community of people that want that not to happen, and they used to just say it out loud, and now they say it in very cryptic phrases that obscure the fact that they're actively fighting that inclusivity, like that they don't want this to be an equitable world, and so they find little things that they can debate about that are just a proxy, they're just a fake argument for the status quo. Recognizing that for what it is and not a really legitimate debate about how everybody gets to participate equally, helps you to understand your own stance on why it is you do what you do. And that, I think, understanding the politics of your own design is critical. If you want to be part of that force, then be my guest. But there comes a time where you have to say, this doesn't, this isn't about fairness or equality, and we're not allies in that work.
Thank you very much. We have one last question for you. I think we touched already at this point. I don't know if you want to add anything. How to extend the inclusive and accessibility design vision to all of the departments in your organization?
Yeah. So the first thing that we're going to do in over the next year is we're going to have another set of trainings that we've done. We started with engineers about 9 years ago. So we did engineers and testers and had basically the same amount of training, but in the context of software, right? What the programming interfaces are for this. And the reason I actually ended up in design was because the difference in what the designers needed to learn compared to the engineers was so substantial. So we're going to continue that and do things for product managers and for program managers and all the other roles that are common to different teams. So they're going to learn what this means to them individually. And then we're going to do group workshops with product teams where we start talking about the things that they do on a regular basis. And this is actually an inclusive design. This is a co-design project that's about inclusive design and co-design, right? So it's this, like, I don't know, like a nesting doll. Like it's a thing inside a thing, that where actually just the investment of an organization as large as like Creative Cloud, which is thousands and thousands of people, to take time out of their day and do this work, that's a message in and of itself, right? That making this something that's people's responsibility to learn makes it clear that it is something that's important to the company. And so we're working on that curriculum. We'll be building it over the next few months, trialing it in the first quarter of next year, and then rolling it out over the rest of the year to everybody in the organization.
Thank you for all your answers. I think we are really close to the end. I want to thank you again so much for joining us today. It really was a pleasure, and I think your talk really tied together all the amazing speech we had today. It was the perfect conclusion for our day. Thank you again so much.
Thank you. Congratulations. You're at the end too.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.
All right. What a day. We had such an amazing list of speakers today. It was really inspiring. Thank you so much for joining today. We are really, really grateful for your support. Before you go, let me just thank everybody who contributed to the organization of this event. Avanad, the University of Milano Bicocca, all the team that worked really hard. Work really hard to bring this event together. All the amazing visual design team that work on the visual identity, the developer. I want to thank Martina and Isabella, who worked so hard to bring this event together. Thank you so much for being with us today. Oh, I think I finally broke. Thank you so much, and maybe, hopefully, see you next year.